Connecticut may be small, but it's packed with mysteries. Stone chambers hidden in the woods. Ghost towns swallowed by forest. Strange noises from beneath the earth. And artifacts found where they shouldn't be. From ancient structures to enduring legends. We'll explore the stories that blur the line between history and the unknown. The mystery of Gungawamp. If you've never heard of Gungwamp, you're in good company. Even people who have lived their whole lives in Connecticut sometimes have no idea it's there. Tucked away in the quiet woods of Groton. It's the kind of place you could pass by without ever realizing it exists. On the surface, it looks like a scatter of stone walls, strange chambers, and weathered piles of rock. But when you step into the clearing and see it for yourself, it doesn't feel like the leftovers of old farmland. It feels older, more layered, like you've wandered into a story whose beginning was lost long ago. The name Gungu itself is a mystery. It's thought to come from a Native American word. But which tribe and what it means is still debated. Some say it could mean swampy place. Others think it means place of ledges. Either way, it fits. The land here is a mix of low hills, thick woods, and little pockets of wetlands. When you approach, the forest closes in around you. Modern sounds, cars, voices, the hum of traffic fade away. You hear only the crunch of leaves underfoot, the snap of a twig, maybe a distant bird call. The air feels cooler under the canopy. And then just ahead, the stonework begins to emerge from the shadows. First, you notice the walls, low, rough, and stretching in directions that don't always make sense. New England is full of old stone walls from colonial days, built by farmers to mark property lines or keep animals in. But these don't follow the usual patterns. Some loop in circles. Others meet at odd angles. A few seem to start and stop for no reason at all, cutting across the landscape like they're following a map no one remembers. Then you come to the chambers. These aren't big, about the size of a shed, but they're built with massive stone slabs fitted carefully together. Inside, the air is cool and still with dim light filtering in through the entrance. In one chamber, in what's called the South Complex, something remarkable happens. Twice a year, the rising sun lines up perfectly with the doorway. This isn't the kind of detail a colonial farmer would have spent time on while just clearing rocks out of a field. The site itself is divided into two main areas. The North Complex has stone circles, rock cans, and more walls. The South Complex is home to the chambers and structures some people call root cellars. But that label feels too simple when you see the precision and thought in their construction. Archaeologists have studied Gungawamp for decades, but they still can't settle on one definitive explanation. There are three main theories. The first is the most straightforward, that most of what we see is colonial. Early settlers cleared stones from fields, built enclosures, and sometimes constructed covered spaces to store crops, tools, or livestock. Over time, these structures weathered into the ruins we see now. This theory explains a lot about the walls, but not the equinox alignment or some of the unusual shapes. The second theory is that the site was already important before Europeans arrived. Indigenous peoples like the Mohegan, while they didn't usually build with massive stone slabs, they did use certain places for ceremonies, gatherings, and seasonal observations. Some researchers think Gungawamp may have started as a sacred site later adapted by settlers who added their own structures. The third theory is the most debated and the most romantic. It suggests that at least part of Gungawamp may have been built by visitors from across the Atlantic long before Columbus. Norse explorers, Celtic monks, or other seafaring groups could have made landfall here, bringing with them the old world style of stone chambers and astronomical alignments. The chambers here do look a lot like beehive huts in Ireland and Scotland, but without solid physical evidence. This idea stays firmly in the realm of possibility, not proof. Regardless of which version you believe, Gungjiwamp has a strange presence. Visitors have claimed that their compasses spin or give false readings here. Paranormal investigators talk about unexplained sounds, moving lights, and sudden drops in temperature. Skeptics point to magnetite in the local rock as the reason for compass issues and say the rest is just suggestion. But even if you don't believe in ghosts or magnetic anomalies, the place feels different, like time has softened here, and the past is still brushing up against the present. Getting to Gungjiwamp isn't as simple as parking your car and walking in. The land is privately owned and protected, so you can't just wander in on your own. The easiest and most respectful way to see it is on a guided tour with the Archaeological Society of Connecticut. And honestly, that's the best way to experience it. The guides point out details you might miss. How toucans line up across a field. How a wall cuts across a hill instead of following the slope. How certain stones may have been deliberately placed to catch the light at specific times of year. If you're lucky enough to visit during the equinox, you'll see that golden beam of sunlight reach all the way into the chamber. It's not flashy or dramatic, just a moment where architecture, nature, and time work together in quiet harmony. The seasons transform the mood of the place. In autumn, the woods glow gold and red, and the stones seem to blend into the fallen leaves. In winter, the walls stand out sharply against the snow, their lines looking almost mathematical. In summer, thick green growth hides much of the site, making it feel secretive and overgrown. Every time of year has its own personality here. What makes Gungjiwamp unique among New England's mystery sites is how stubbornly it refuses to be neatly categorized. It's not purely ancient, not purely practical, and not purely ceremonial. It's all of those things and maybe more. Every time you think you've figured it out, some small detail pulls you back into uncertainty. Standing inside one of the chambers, it's hard not to imagine the person who built it. Were they marking the turning of the seasons, waiting for the first day of spring to start planting, holding a spiritual ritual at the moment the light reached the back wall? Or were they just solving a storage problem in a way that by accident mimicked ancient traditions? That's the beauty of this place. It makes you wonder. The quiet, the light, the weight of the stone all come together to create something that feels like it's meant to be experienced, not just studied. Today, Gungjiwamp is cared for gently. Guided tours limit foot traffic, so the stonework isn't damaged. The downside is that you can't just decide to visit on a whim. But maybe that's part of its magic. It hasn't been turned into a crowded attraction. When you do visit, you're seeing it much as it's been for centuries, undisturbed and still holding its secrets. As for my own opinion, I think Gungjiwamp is a patchwork of human history, a place used and reused by different peoples for different reasons, each leaving their own mark. The layers of meaning overlap so much that pulling them apart might never be possible. And maybe it shouldn't be in a world where we expect every mystery to be solved. Gungjiwamp reminds us that some places are more powerful when they stay unanswered. Music, the Dudleytown curse. Dudleytown is one of those places where history and legend are so tightly knotted together that it's almost impossible to pull them apart. On paper, it was once just a small colonial settlement in Cornwall, Connecticut. A few farmhouses, a scattering of pastures and dirt paths winding through the Litchfield Hills. Nothing that would make it stand out from 100 other tiny communities of its time. Today, all that's left is an overgrown patch of forest with no standing buildings. Just moss-covered stone foundations, collapsed cellar holes, and the faint lines where old roads used to be. Yet, in the public imagination, Dudleytown is something far darker. It's the cursed ghost town of Connecticut, a place where misfortune chased away the living until only the stories remained. The legend begins, as these things often do, with a family name, the Dudleys. The most popular version of the tale traces them back to England in the 1500s. Depending on which storyteller you hear, one branch of the family fell out of royal favor, either because of political betrayal or because whispers of witchcraft followed them. Whatever the cause, they supposedly fled across the Atlantic, but according to the legend, they brought something with them, a curse. This curse, the story goes, doomed the Dudleys and anyone connected to them to madness, tragedy, and death. It's a good hook. But historians who have actually looked into the early Dudley families in Connecticut say their lives were fairly typical for the era. There were, yes, but there always were. In the 1700s, still, the seed of the curse story had been planted. And once it took root, it grew into something far more chilling than reality. Dudley Town wasn't even a town in the official sense. It was more of a neighborhood settled in the mid-700s. The land here was hilly, rocky, and poor for farming. The people who lived here worked hard to scrape a living from it. But the environment wasn't kind. As the decades passed, small tragedies began to pile up. Stories tell of residents struck by sudden mental illness, mysterious fevers, or freak accidents. One man reportedly returned home from a trip to find his wife had gone mad. Another simply walked into the forest one day and never came back. In some tellings, strange lights flickered in the trees at night. Other times, eerie voices were heard echoing through the hills. Whether these events really happened as described, or whether time and retelling have made them more dramatic, it's impossible to say, but the effect was the same. The stories built a reputation for the place as somewhere you didn't want to linger. By the late 1800s, Dudley Town was already fading. Young people left for better opportunities, jobs and factories, farmland that wasn't so unforgiving. Each family that moved away left their home to collapse in on itself. Nature started to reclaim the settlement. By the early 20th century, the forest had swallowed nearly all traces of it. That's when the ghost stories really took hold. Visitors claimed to feel icy chills out of nowhere, to hear faint whispers in the still air, to see shadowy figures slipping between the trees. Paranormal groups declared it one of New England's most haunted places. The so-called curse was no longer just part of the Dudley family. It had spread to the land itself. Skeptics, of course, have their own explanations. They point out that isolation and hardship can make any misfortune feel more ominous. In the days before good medical care, a simple infection could take a life. Long winters and rural solitude could lead to depression, paranoia, or mental decline. And when the settlement was gone, the lack of hard facts made it easy for ghost stories to fill the empty spaces in the record. Today, Dudley Town is private property owned by the Dark Entry Forest Association. Trespassing is strictly forbidden, which ironically has only made its reputation grow. There's something irresistible about a haunted place you're not allowed to see. The owners say the land is simply a quiet forest preserve, and that the curse is pure fiction. But the ban hasn't stopped thrill-seekers from sneaking in. Some of those who have gone in without permission claim they've had cameras suddenly die, batteries drain in seconds, or headaches hit them out of nowhere. Others say they've felt eyes on them, though they could never find the source. Skeptics say it's all suggestion, the power of a good story, making you feel what you expect to feel. For those who've managed to visit legally, Dudley Town doesn't look like the set of a horror movie. It's not a standing ghost town. It's a forest where the ghosts are in the ground, not in the air. A mossy pile of stones might have been a chimney once. A sunken rectangle in the earth could be a collapsed cellar. There are places where trees now grow in neat rows, not because someone planted them that way, but because they sprouted in the footprints of old gardens. The atmosphere depends on your mindset. In bright afternoon light, can feel almost peaceful. the air soft with the smell of damp leaves. But in the fading light of evening, those same cellar holes look like open mouths, and the shadows between the trees feel closer. The curse itself may have less to do with any supernatural force and more to do with how we tell stories. A tragedy becomes a coincidence. A coincidence becomes a pattern. And a pattern repeated often enough becomes a warning that's passed down through generations. Over time, that warning turns into a legend, and the legend becomes inseparable from the place. Standing there, you can't see the settlers who once tried to make a life here, but you can imagine them. You can imagine the isolation, the long winters, the disappointment of watching crops fail. You can imagine how in a time when the night was truly dark and silent, every flicker of light and every unexplained noise might carry more weight. That to me is the heart of Dudley Town. It's not about ghosts drifting through the trees. It's about the way memory lingers in a landscape. The way people's lives and struggles imprint themselves on a place even after the physical structures are gone, and how those imprints over time get dressed up in superstition until they feel like something otherworldly. Whether you believe in the curse or not, there's something about Dudley Town that stays with you. Maybe it's the way the forest presses in, or how quiet it gets when the wind drops. Maybe it's knowing that you're standing in a place where stories have been told and retold for more than a century. Whatever it is, Dudley Town has a weight to it, presence. And maybe that's the real curse. Not one that brings death or madness, but one that makes sure the place is never forgotten. Even as the forest grows thicker and the last traces of the old settlement fade into the moss, the legend keeps pulling people back. Not to live here, but to wonder. The mood noises. If you've ever been to East Hatham, Connecticut, you might have heard about something called the mood noises. And if you haven't, well, you're in for one of New England's strangest stories. For centuries, people here have been hearing deep rumbling, almost otherworldly sounds coming from underground. These aren't sharp cracks like a falling tree branch or the boom of thunder after a storm. They're low, rolling, and heavy, like the earth itself is speaking in a language we can't quite understand. Sometimes they're loud enough to rattle windows. Other times they're so faint you wonder if you imagine them. Locals call them the mutus noises, and they've been part of this area's identity for longer than written history. The name mutus itself comes from the native word maki mutus, which roughly translates to the place of bad noises. Long before Europeans arrived, local tribes told stories about the sounds. They treated the area with caution, believing the noises came from powerful spirits who could be angered. Some said the rumblings were warnings. Others thought they were signs of coming danger. Either way, you didn't ignore them. If you go to Makamuta State Park today, you're standing right on top of this legendary ground. The hills are peaceful now. Open fields, winding trails, and views of the Connecticut River. But beneath your feet is the heart of the mystery. When the Puritan settlers arrived in the 1600s, they heard the noises, too, and being Puritans, they quickly gave them a religious spin. Some thought they were hearing battles between invisible spirits. Others believed it was God's anger shaking the ground. In 1729, Reverend Stephen Hosmer described the noises in his journal, comparing them to distant thunder or the boom of cannon fire. Imagine living in a small colonial village far from any battlefield, and suddenly the earth under you starts rumbling like an approaching army. The odd thing is the noises don't follow any kind of schedule. You could hear them 3 times in 1 week and then nothing for a year. They might sound like a faint roll in the distance, or they might be sharp and explosive like a gunshot buried deep underground. Some locals say they're more common in spring and fall. And here's another twist. They don't come from one spot. People have reported hearing them from different hills and valleys all around the area. So, what's going on? Modern science does have an explanation. At least partly. East Hatham sits on a web of small fault lines. That means tiny earthquakes called microquakes happen here all the time. They're too weak to cause damage. But when the ground shifts, it sends out low-frequency sound waves. And thanks to the unique layers of rock under mutus, those sounds get amplified. The hard bedrock over softer material acts like a giant echo chamber, turning a small geological pop into a loud, eerie boom that can travel for miles. That all makes sense until it doesn't. Because even scientists admit that not every sound lines up with a recorded quake. And there are plenty of eyewitness stories from people who swear they've heard the noises on perfectly calm days with no seismic activity at all. This is where folklore steps back into the picture. Over the years, the noises have been linked to all kinds of legends. Some say they're the voices of ancient spirits still watching over the land. Others imagine a battle being fought underground, the echoes of a war long past. And let's be honest, once you're standing in a quiet Connecticut field and you hear a deep growl coming from nowhere, you're not thinking about fault lines. The noises have even seeped into local culture. The town's high school teams have been called the Noises. Businesses borrow the name for everything from restaurants to shops. Tourists come to Makamuda State Park just hoping to hear it for themselves. Most leave with nothing but a nice hike. But a few lucky or unlucky visitors walk away with a story they'll tell for the rest of their lives. Sometimes the noises are so loud they spark panic. There have been cases where people called the police, convinced there'd been an explosion nearby. But when officers arrived, nothing. No smoke. No damage. Just the fading memory of that unshakable sound. If you visit, the setting feels almost too peaceful for something so strange. You'll see rolling green hills, patches of forest, and the 8-mile river winding its way through the land before joining the Connecticut River. On a clear day, sunlight dances on the water and birds cut lazy paths through the sky. You might be walking a trail when without warning it happens. It starts like the faint hum of a far-off storm. Your ears can barely catch it, but your body feels it low and deep like it's rising up through your shoes. Then the sound swells, turning into a hollow boom that seems to come from everywhere at once. Just when you start to think it's going to build into something bigger, it's gone. The birds are still singing. The river's still flowing. The only thing left is the rush of adrenaline in your chest. Personally, I think the mood noises are a perfect blend of science and mystery. Yes, we can explain most of them with geology. But most isn't all. And sometimes the unknown is the best part. For hundreds of years, people have stood on this same ground, felt the same vibrations and wondered about the same questions. Are they just the earth stretching its ancient bones? Or is there something else? Something older still speaking from beneath our feet? Whatever the truth is, the mood noises are more than just a sound. They're a reminder that the world we walk on still has secrets. And every once in a while, it lets us hear them. The ancient fort at Saybrook Point. If you stand at Saybrook Point today, you see calm water stretching in two directions. The wide Connecticut River on one side, Long Island Sound on the other. Fishing boats drift in and out of the marina. The lighthouse stands quiet and gulls circle overhead. It's peaceful, picturesque. The kind of place where you'd expect nothing more exciting than a sailboat race or a sunny afternoon picnic. But 4 centuries ago, this very point wasn't a place for leisure. It was a point of power, a place to defend, a place to hold at all costs. And some say it was important long before any map marked it. Long before any colonist set foot here. That's where the mystery begins. The legend of the so-called ancient fort of Saybrook Point. Our documented history of the place begins in 1635. That's when English settlers built Fort Saybrook to guard the mouth of the Connecticut River. Back then, this wasn't just any patch of land. It was the key to the region. Whoever controlled this spot controlled river access for trade, travel, and military movement. The English knew it. The Dutch knew it, and the native peoples of the area knew it. The fort itself wasn't stone like a castle. It was built from timber and earthworks with defensive walls and heavy cannons aimed at the water. Those cannons were there to make sure no Dutch ship or any ship came up the river without permission. Fort Saarbrück wasn't just a lookout. It was a statement. This is ours. And it saw action. The fort played a role in the Pequot War, one of the earliest and bloodiest conflicts between English settlers and native tribes in New England. Later, it served in other disputes. But time has a way of moving on. By the late 1600s, the fort had been abandoned, left to rot, nature slowly reclaiming it. That's the official agreed-upon history. But it's not the whole story. Because tucked away in old journals and passed down in whispers is a claim that's far more intriguing. According to some early settlers, the English didn't build the first fort here at all. When they arrived, they found signs of something older. Strange mounds, earthen embankments that didn't match Pequot or other local native designs. One journal even describes them as ancient works, though the writer doesn't say exactly what they looked like. That vague phrasing has fueled speculation for nearly 400 years. Who built them? Some theories point to Norse explorers, the Vikings, who may have traveled far beyond Newfoundland. There are controversial claims of Norse artifacts in New England, though nothing conclusive. If they did reach this far south, Saarbrück Point would have been an ideal defensive spot. Others believe it was the work of an even older native culture. The Connecticut River Valley has been inhabited for thousands of years, long before the Pequots rose to prominence. Could it be that a forgotten people once claimed this spot and built defenses here? If so, who were they, and what happened to them? The frustrating truth is archaeology hasn't been much help. Digs in the area have been limited, partly because the land is now developed with marinas, homes, and a park. The few excavations that have happened have turned up both colonial and indigenous artifacts, but nothing that screams pre-Columbian fort. No stone walls, no obvious ancient tools. Just the usual mix of history that comes from a place long inhabited. Still, if you walk the land, you can see why anyone, no matter the century, would have chosen it. It's a narrow strip of high ground with a panoramic view of the river's mouth. You can see far in every direction. Ships coming from the Sound have nowhere to hide. Even small canoes coming down river would be spotted immediately. Whoever held Saarbrück Point held the gateway. And then there are the stories. Some local native oral histories tell of a great battle here long before the English came. In some versions, two rival tribes fought for control of the point, leaving so many dead that the land itself was said to remember the bloodshed. Some say the bones of warriors still lie beneath the soil. Are these stories literal history, or are they symbolic, meant to explain why the place felt so charged, so significant? We may never know. But when you're standing there on a quiet day looking out at the water, it's not hard to imagine the clash of paddles, the shouting of warriors, the crack of musket fire centuries later. Today, the site is preserved as Fort Saarbrück Monument Park. There's a boardwalk winding through the marsh with plaques telling the colonial story. A replica cannon points out toward the water, a reminder of when this was the front line of English defense. But you have to use your imagination to see what once stood here. No paved parking lots, no lighthouse, just open marshland, the river, the Sound, and a fortified wall with men on watch, eyes fixed on the horizon for trouble. What fascinates me most is the idea that the English fort was just one chapter in a much longer history. That this piece of land may have been defended, abandoned, and defended again, stretching back not hundreds but thousands of years. That it might have been chosen again and again for the same reason. Simply the perfect place to hold. Humans have always sought the high ground, the place where you can see danger coming, where you can control movement, where your position itself becomes your weapon. Saarbrück Point checks all those boxes. And here's something to think about. Even if there was never a Viking fort here, even if there was never a mysterious lost culture building embankments, the stories themselves tell us something. They tell us the point has always stirred the imagination. It has always been seen as a place of power. That's why I think the mystery isn't just about who built what or when. It's about why. Why does this one strip of land keep calling people back century after century? Why did the English decide it was worth defending with cannon fire? Why did earlier peoples, maybe many of them, decide it was worth defending with their lives? Standing there today, with the tide pulling in and the breeze carrying the smell of salt water, you can almost feel that weight of history under your feet. The land itself seems to be watching as if it's seen all this before. And maybe it has. Fort Saarbrück is the fort we know. But the ancient fort of Saarbrück Point, the one whispered about in old journals and native legends, that's the one that keeps the mystery alive. Because maybe, just maybe, the real story here isn't about the past at all. Maybe it's about the fact that some places never lose their importance and they never stop holding their secrets. The Wethersfield Cove Shipwreck Mystery. Wethersfield Cove is the kind of place you might pass without giving it a second thought. Tucked just off the Connecticut River, a short drive from Hartford, it looks like the definition of calm. On a summer afternoon, you'll see small sailboats rocking gently at their moorings, ducks leaving ripples across the shallows, and anglers casting their lines from the shore with quiet patience. The smell of river mud mixes with the faint scent of reeds, and the air feels still, almost timeless. But beneath that peaceful surface, there's a story most people never hear, a mystery that's been hiding here for nearly a century, one that starts with a ship buried far from the open sea. The story first surfaced in the 1930s. Back then, workers were dredging part of the cove in the marshland nearby. It was just another day on the job. Mud, silt, and hard physical labor until something unexpected came up from the muck. Slowly, a large section of wooden hull began to appear. Heavy timbers darkened by centuries underwater. The planks were in surprisingly good shape, preserved in the oxygen-starved riverbed. It didn't take long for people to realize this wasn't just any piece of wood. It was part of a ship, a big one. At first, they guessed it dated to the 1700s, maybe even earlier. That would have put it squarely in the colonial era, a time when Connecticut's river towns bustled with trade. But there was something about this find that didn't add up. The wreck wasn't in the main river channel. It was stuck in shallow water in a spot where no large ship would normally sail. And the way it rested in the mud, it didn't look like the result of an accident. More like it had been put there on purpose. Word got around fast. Historians, amateur archaeologists, and curious locals all wanted a look. Soon, theories began to swirl. One theory was the most straightforward. Maybe it was a trading vessel that had simply run ground. Floods and storms on the Connecticut River were nothing unusual. And if the ship had been damaged, the crew might have stripped it of anything valuable and walked away. Over time, the mud and silt would have swallowed what was left. Another idea was more tactical. During the Revolutionary War, Connecticut's river towns lived under constant threat from the British Navy. It wasn't unheard of for locals to sink old ships in strategic spots to block enemy access. Could this have been one of those sacrificial ships deliberately scuttled to keep the British from sailing in? But then came the stranger possibility, one that ties into the way rivers themselves are always changing. The Connecticut River has never been a fixed thing. In colonial times, massive floods sometimes shifted its course entirely. Places that are dry land today might have been open water 300 years ago. If that's the case, the cove we see now may have looked completely different when the ship was afloat. Could have been stranded during one of those big changes. left high and dry as the river decided to carve a new path for itself. And if that happened, it would explain why the ship feels so oddly out of place. What makes this mystery even harder to solve is the total lack of records. No ship's name, no captain's log, no bill of sale or insurance claim. It's as if it simply slipped through the cracks of history. This blank space in the story has been fertile ground for local legends. One rumor says the ship might have been used for smuggling in the 1700s, quietly moving goods along the river away from prying eyes. It's not far-fetched. Wethersfield was an active trade hub in those days, and the cove with its sheltered waters would have made the perfect hiding place. Long before Europeans arrived, indigenous peoples also made use of this spot. For them, it was a natural harbor, a place to fish, to gather, and to travel along the river's arteries. Later, for settlers, it became a link between Connecticut's farmlands and the wider world beyond Long Island Sound. Stand on the shore today, and you can still see why. The cove is tucked away from the river's main current, a quiet pocket of water that offers safety from storms and ice. From here, a ship could slip onto the Connecticut River, sail down to the Sound, and then out into the Atlantic. But you won't see any trace of the shipwreck now. The remains are still there, buried deep in the silt, hidden from casual eyes. No jagged ribs of wood jutting from the water. No signposts marking the spot. For most visitors, the mystery is invisible. What you will see are the gentle ripples of passing boats, the soft green of summer trees reflecting in the water, and the colonial-style houses lining the nearby streets. Kids fish from the dock. Couples walk along the path. It feels like a place completely at peace with itself. But if you know the story, standing here feels different. You start to imagine what it must have been like the day the ship went down. Was there a storm overhead? The sharp crack of timbers breaking? Or was it a still night? The only sound, the lapping of water as someone made the deliberate choice to sink her. You might picture her as she once was. A tall masted vessel gliding up the Connecticut River. Sails billowing in the wind. Or maybe you imagine her abandoned, half submerged as the shoreline shifted year by year until she became nothing more than a dark shape beneath the surface. For me, that's the part that lingers. The way the river keeps its secrets. Over time, it shifts and reshapes everything around it. Harbors silt up. Islands appear and disappear. Old wrecks vanish under layers of mud. The Wethersfield Cove ship could have been many things. A victim of bad luck. A weapon of defense. A smuggler's silent partner. Or a casualty of nature's slow, relentless hand. We may never know the truth. But maybe that's what makes places like this matter. They remind us that the ground under our feet and the water we look out over hasn't always been the way it is now. The landscape we take for granted is constantly in motion, changing the rules, rewriting its own history, and sometimes, just beneath the surface, is holding on to the past. So the next time you're at Wethersfield Cove, take a moment to stop and look out at the still water. Imagine the shape of a ship lying hidden below, her story locked away in the mud. Think about the lives that once crossed here. The storms weathered, the trade made, the quiet choices that shaped what we see now. Because in a place like this, the past isn't gone. It's just waiting for someone to find it again.